Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Lotspeich. I am a junior in the Capital Scholars, Sociology, Anthropology, and Political Sciences program here at UIS. And today I would like to present on expressions of rural local education agency reorganization perceptions research using a meta-analysis methodology for analysis. Now, in this presentation, I'm going to use some educational research specific terms, and I want to make sure I define that ahead of time for my audience. I'm going to use the term LEA, or an entity which operates local public primary and secondary schools in the United States, which is referred to as external stakeholders in educational research by school districts. And then the second term is reorganization. Now, because educational policy in the United States is decentralized state by state, I pulled the NISB definition as the umbrella term, which includes different forms of reorganization, such as consolidation, conversion, unit district formation, annexation, high school deactivation, cooperative high school attendance centers. Now I'd like to talk to you about the purpose of my study here today. Basically, what I hope to do is I hope to do a quantitative meta-analysis of 7 qualitative case studies through the interdisciplinary fields of educational policy and rural sociology. These interdisciplinary fields were purposefully selected as educational policy operates at a higher level of bureaucracy, while rural sociology emphasizes an ethnographic study of social behaviors and mannerisms in rural populations. Integrated together, rural sociology can provide educational researchers with a cognitive knowledge as to the possible resulting social stratification, deviance, and change because of their policy implementation. From this, I verified 2 of my research and 1 null hypotheses. I found that community members perceive a loss of democratic identity through the reorganization process, and community members also perceive that these reorganized LEAs provide a greater efficiency with highly qualified staff, and that community members view these as containing a broadened academic and extracurricular education. This was determined through an institutional review work process with the 5 independent coders in the Educational Leadership Graduate Program here at the University of Illinois Springfield. And then finally, the purpose of this study was because there is a current dearth or lack of data collected on what best practices in rural education and rural policy governance versus an urban bias in educational research. I utilized a Gaussian meta-analysis approach to quantitatively aggregate the results of these multiple studies to arrive at an overall conclusion or summary across the studies. Basically, what I did was I started off by surveying mass media sources to see what some common perceptions of LEA reorganization were. From here, I determined 2 kind of major themes and then looked using Berkins library sources for specific researchers who had similar theories to this reorganization. Okay, there we go. I had a wider expanded rubric that I provided to the coders to utilize. What happened was they would code based on 3 sections: social identity, economies of scale, and opportunities available, code into the 2 themes on a rubric of about 5 using keywords. Once they used these keywords, it assigned a statistical determinant to it, which allowed us to quantitatively aggregate the data we collected and then qualitatively reanalyze it with a literature review. The research question that I designed to do this presentation, for some reason, the clicker is not working now. Okay, of 2 major themes: what trends exist in survey research case studies on community perceptions of rural local education agency reorganization that were published between 2000 and 2014 in regards to the community's perceptions of benefits or complications. I found in the first collection of data from the coders, in the modes, there was a fairly universal mode across for the case studies that community members perceived a loss of democratic identity. That being said, CS also existed as an outlier due to social geography. Rodriguez was actually an interesting outlier I'd also like to bring up because this community was 95.2% Latino. So we're also looking at these ideas of different institutions that serve as tools of collective identity within these rural communities and how there might be a difference in Latino culture versus these otherwise predominantly Caucasian American schools. Second, reorganization justified by economies of scales research. ED was another outlier based on social geography, and otherwise they tended to fall more towards community members perceiving there would be a cost savings through the reorganization process. And then Lotspeich did not touch on economies of scales argument within her dissertation. And then finally, the research hypotheses 3 are testing for community members perceiving additional opportunities available. It all fell on Smith's side of the spectrum, or saying that community members perceived that there would be more opportunities available within the reorganization process, which is my 1 null and 2 research hypotheses. And now I kind of want to dig back into a qualitative analysis of this data. So my first hypothesis was that there was going to be a correlation with Hawley-Johnson and Petry's theme of, or perspective of LEAs as a tool of social identity. One of the community analyzed in Brown's 2011 case study was Sandy Mush, North Carolina, which lost its school, post office, and separate identity when students were transported to a school 10 miles away. What had happened was community members at this time had no cognitive knowledge in 2009, 2010, when she conducted her survey research, that this separate community had one time existed. This is because LEAs in rural communities serve a special role because they serve as the centerpiece of the community and a tool for the reproduction of collective identity. This reproduction of collective identity leads to a commitment with land, family, and nature, and there's a danger in the reorganization process with families that were linked to the community feel like they've lost ties and move on to different pastures. In terms of talking about research hypotheses 2, or the economies of scales, we need to consider that there has been a major shift in agrarian communities in the past 20-25 years, or a transition from agricultural and manufacturing jobs to positions in the lower paying service industry, which leads to an influx of community poverty that brings decreased tax revenues for LEAs and the closure of local businesses. With this being said, you have these schools that once held 300 to 400 students in the high school that now hold 150 to 200, and there feels like there's an inability to provide the same level of achievement that was once given before. So in multiple case studies in the sample, community members perceived a cost savings as the larger districts displayed an effective use of finances, even if the literature and research presented a contrasting viewpoint. I don't specifically touch on it in this presentation, but I'm going to dig into it a little now. There is a major conflict between perceptions of LEA reorganization and what the actual research says on LEA reorganization. For instance, just kind of a little mass media study that was done by the Charleston Gazette. West Virginia went through a mandated reorganization process with all their LEAs throughout the state. What had happened was this was done on a basis of reducing cost expenditures. Even in considering the COLA over time, there was a cost increase of about $3,000 to $4,000 per student, even as student enrollment continued to drop because of the expenditures of administration and transportation costs alone. Not that completely discludes building costs, because those are based on local cash funds. And then finally, hypothesis 3, that there was a correlation with the idea that there would be more opportunities available as a theory. The Detroit, Oregon community members acknowledged that it was becoming increasingly difficult for them to maintain their programs locally, and they were happy that this larger high school could provide more opportunities. These community members are perceiving that their children are better off attending these larger institutions because these larger institutions can provide new curricular options with electives and advanced courses, career and technical education, and more opportunities. And then finally, there's kind of a bridge between this idea of the larger institution and maintaining the social identity, where the community members perceived that they felt a sense of identity generated through extracurricular activities like art, theater, and music, and athletics in these larger institutions. So to move into the discussion, there is no universal theory in LEA reorganization. The research that I'm providing here today does not support or disconfirm previous findings. What it does is it verifies certain portions of Smith and Hawley-Johnson Petry's theories, and no one theory on reorganization obviously will fit every case, as we even saw in the outlier in Rodriguez's study. Intentions are symbolic of their involved interests in actors and public policy, which manifest in the final products. So now that we're examining this idea of rural identity and how it's shaped by macro level educational policy, we have to be conscious of the actors in the policy making process. And then finally, to avoid this broad brush based upon by edict actors and use methods in creating educational governance policy, such as the donkey carrot method of encouraging LEA reorganization versus pushing it from a macro level. Finally, I want to talk about kind of actors in educational policy. Policy actors create conditions that can become consequential at linked future sites and phases of policy activity. So we look at that idea of who's the player, who's the actor in the educational policy. So this research should be utilized for self-determination in educational perceptions by rural LEA agency boards of education. And it should also be used to demonstrate that community members in rural agrarian communities, as illustrated through the case study survey research analyzed, realized aspects of their identity are culturally defined by public institutions, and in acting by what is good for their children based on their knowledge of their community's backwards and rural ideology, are able to be persuaded to adopt the latest edict ideologies in a school reform or popularized by research that has been conducted mostly on rural and urban education. And then finally, what should you take away from this presentation here today? You should remember that community members perceive that their social identity is diminished through the LEA reorganization, but districts attempt to counteract this through athletics and extracurricular success as a rallying point. Second, you should remember that feasibility studies should be used to test for cost savings that are financially provided through a donkey carrot method of policy instead of relying on research theories or community perceptions. Just because the community or board thinks reorganization will save money doesn't mean it necessarily will, based on the research that we've seen here today. And then finally, by sheer size, community members perceive larger schools can offer more sections or elective courses. There's kind of an argument posed that there would be less athletic spots available. This was counteracted by research that said that students who might have not done a sport before at the previous school would then participate in wrestling or a men's volleyball or a different sport their previous school wasn't able to offer. Finally, this thesis serves a crucial role in defending the perceptions of community members, but there is so much more space to grow in developing a cognitive understanding of rural LEA reorganization in rural communities. Lotspeich wrote in 2010 that it was clear that a community's desire for quality academic curriculum and active extracurricular opportunities took precedence to their need for a local high school. Whether this change was a result of educational knowledge, political rhetoric, or other identity by contemporary media still rests as a source of further contention, as no community, even those secluded by a lot of corn, exist within a vacuum of policy.
All right, we have about 2 minutes or so for questions. If anyone has any questions.
I cut out the entire literature review, which is why some of it might get a little confusing. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.